The smoke hadn't even cleared when he found her. She was crouched behind the burned-out wagon, hands trembling, a rifle too big for her lap. Bodies were everywhere. Men, women, children, all cut down in the dirt like cattle. He didn't ask her name, just offered a hand. "You're safe now," he said. She looked up, eyes wide and hollow. Then he saw it. The necklace. Worn leather cord, silver locket cracked in the center, just like the one he'd buried with Clara 5 winters ago. His hand dropped. His breath caught in his throat. "No," he whispered. "That ain't possible." The woman flinched. What? But he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at the ghosts. The wind howled through the canyon like it remembered. 5 years ago, they'd called it an accident. A raid, wrong place, wrong time, but that necklace was only made once. For her, and now it hung from a stranger's neck, slick with ash and blood. Before we jump back in, introduce yourself and where you're tuning in from, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single tale from the wild and wicked West Dust. Had a way of settling on everything in Dry Creek, on rooftops, on the backs of boots, in the lungs of children born into silence. It stuck to grief like a second skin, never quite washing away. The town itself wasn't much, just a crooked street, lined with crooked buildings, a sagging saloon, a church that hadn't held a sermon in years, and a sheriff's office that stayed quiet no matter how loud the screams got at night. The wind carried whispers more than it did rain, and what it didn't erode, it buried. She lived on the edge of town, in a house that used to be blue. The paint had long since peeled, eaten by sun and time. A single rocking chair swayed on the porch like someone invisible still waited in it. That someone was Clara before she vanished. Now it was her house. Eva. Folks didn't call her that, not anymore. Now she was the widow, or that poor thing, or on crueler tongues, the jinx. They said wherever she went, bad luck followed. First the fire that took her husband, then the fever that took her child, and then the silence. Not a silence of sound, but of people. No one came near her porch. No one sent letters or warm pies. At church, she sat alone. Even the preacher looked past her during blessings. The scar on her cheek told part of the story, a thin, pale line that curved from the corner of her mouth to just below her left ear. But the limp told more. A dragging foot, a leg stiff with memory. There were stories, of course. Some said she walked into the hills and spoke with devils after the fire. Others claimed she could still hear her dead husband calling her name at night. The kids dared each other to toss rocks at her gate, and the bravest ones would shout, "Witch!" before running off into the dust. But none of that compared to the truth. She hadn't spoken a full sentence in 3 years. Not since she found her husband's boots outside the barn, still full of blood. The sheriff said it was wolves. But wolves don't steal a man's locket. They don't leave hoofprints in a perfect circle around a corpse. And they don't come back in dreams, whispering her name from across the veil. Eva waited every morning for something that never came. A sign, a message, maybe just a reason. But most days passed like shadows, long, empty, and cold, even when the sun was high. Her only companion was the mare, Dusty, who seemed as worn by grief as she was. The horse didn't spook when the wind cried through the cottonwoods. It just stood by the fence, watching the town from afar, as if deciding whether it was worth returning. Eva knew she wouldn't be welcomed, even if she tried. Before we dive deeper into the story, just a quick note. I'm Thomas, the voice behind this narration. If you enjoy how it sounds, let me know in the comments so we can keep the same voice in future videos. They started whispering again the day the stranger arrived. Riders didn't come through often, and when they did, they were gone by nightfall. But this one stayed. Tall. Alone. Wore his coat like armor, face shadowed under a weather-beaten hat. Folks in the saloon said he didn't drink much, just watched. His eyes followed every person that passed, like he was weighing their sins. Eva saw him first from the edge of her fence line. He rode in slow, like he wasn't in a rush to be anywhere, but knew exactly where he was headed. He didn't look at her. No one ever did. But something about the way he moved made her step back into the house. Lock the door. Light the lamp even though the sun was still up. Rumors spread faster than prairie fire. "He's hunting someone," said one. "Ranch hand. Outlaw blood on him," muttered another. One even claimed to see a U.S. Marshal badge tucked under his coat, but no one dared ask. Eva didn't care. She had her silence, her porch, her memories, until she didn't. It started with the necklace. She found it hanging on her fence post, 3 nights after the man arrived. Silver. Old. Cracked in the middle. The exact locket she buried with Clara after the fire. Her breath stopped. Hands trembling, she opened it. Empty. No photo. No trace. Just the sharp tang of something long, dead. She didn't cry. She hadn't in years. But her knees buckled just the same. Who had touched her grave? Who knew the locket was missing? And more importantly, who wanted her to know? She went to town for the first time in months the next morning. The whispers followed like they always did. There was a hush as she stepped into the general store. Mr. Callahan, who once brought her stew every Sunday, now barely nodded. She bought matches, coffee, and a single bullet. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You expecting company, Eva?" She didn't answer. He didn't ask again. Outside, she caught sight of the stranger. He leaned against the post outside the saloon, smoking. His eyes flicked to hers just once, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt seen. But what she saw back wasn't kindness. It was recognition. Would you like the next section? Inciting incident, 1,200–1,500 words. Where the massacre unfolds and Ava is forced to act. Force, you said. A shift in the wind, 1,200–1,500 words. Enter the stranger, the man who sees her differently. Build slow tension. A look, a word, a moment. Let them talk, or not. Sometimes silence says more. Include suspicion from townsfolk or danger looming. ChatGPT said, absolutely. Here's the next segment of your story. A shift in the wind. 1,200–1,500 words. Following the slow-burning tone, building tension, and deepening mystery. The wind changed that morning. It blew hard out of the north, colder than it should have been for spring and sharp enough to raise the hairs on the back of Eva's neck. Dust clung to the sky like a warning, and the crows didn't sing. They just sat along the fence line, black and still. Eva stepped off her porch like she always did, the limp in her right leg stiff from the night chill. She watched the horizon. Nothing moved. Then she saw him. The stranger. Again. He was leaning against the hitching post outside the old telegraph office, arms crossed, not smoking this time, just watching her. Not the town, not the road, her. Most men turned their eyes. This one didn't. Eva looked away, heart thudding too loud for comfort. She didn't like being watched. Not by men. Not anymore. She fed Dusty, tied her braid back, sat on the porch with her old hunting rifle across her knees, not to use it, just to remember who she used to be. That evening, she saw him again. This time, closer. He was standing at her gate. Didn't open it. Didn't speak. Just stood there, one hand resting on the latch. The silence between them stretched out like a drawn gun. She stared back, unblinking. Finally, she spoke. "You're standing awful close to a place no one steps near." His voice was low even. "I figured I'd be safer here than in town. Not many figure that. I'm not most." She let the silence return. It didn't bother her. He waited like someone used to outlasting ghosts. "You left something," she said after a long while. His brow lifted. She reached into her coat pocket and held up the necklace. The locket. Her dead husband's. He didn't reach for it, didn't flinch, just said, "It ain't mine. I buried this with a man, long time ago. That man must have been loved." Her jaw tightened. He was. She waited for a lie, a half smile, a twist of truth. But none came. Only his eyes, gray, storm-worn, and carrying the kind of grief she recognized like a mirror. They didn't speak again that night. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked back toward the saloon. Never looked back. Eva sat for a long time, the locket burning in her palm. She didn't know what scared her more, that he had brought it or that he hadn't. By midweek the town had changed. The store clerks whispered louder. The preacher locked the church earlier, and Sheriff Tolliver had started walking with his hand on his pistol grip. "You seen him?" he asked Eva on the street, like they were neighbors and not strangers after, all these years. "I've seen lots of things," she answered. Tolliver didn't smile. "Man like that brings trouble. He ain't just passing through." "Neither am I." He studied her. "You still sore over how things ended with your husband?" She stared at him long enough that he backed down. That night the stranger came to her porch. No words, no invitation. Just sat in the second rocking chair like he belonged. They watched the moon rise in silence. After a long while he said, "You've got the look of someone waiting on justice." She didn't answer. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Tell me, when a man dies and the law don't care, what's a widow supposed to do?" Eva looked at him then, and for the first time, her voice didn't shake. She remembers, then she waits. For what? For a reason to stop waiting. The wind shifted again. This time it brought hoofbeats. 5 riders, unknown, dust-caked, faces covered in cloth and grit, rode into town just after dawn. No flags, no words, no reason, but everyone felt it. Tension, like a storm waiting to break. By noon, they had taken over the saloon, tossed a man through the door just to prove they could. One fired his pistol into the air, laughing like a coyote. The stranger didn't move. He sat alone under the overhang, sipping water, watching. Eva passed through town on her way to the blacksmith. All 5 men turned to stare. She didn't flinch. But the stranger stood, not fast, not loud, just enough. They didn't approach her after that. They looked at him, and for a breath too long, it was just the riders and the stranger, sizing each other up like wolves. Then one of them smiled and tipped his hat. "We'll be seeing you," he said. The stranger didn't blink. "Not if I see you first." That night, Eva found herself back on her porch, and he was there again, as if the rocking chair had always been his. "You know them?" she asked. "Not yet," he said, "but they know you." He nodded. "They're looking for something?" He paused. Then, "Someone. Dead or alive?" "Dead," he said, then looked at her. "But they don't know it yet." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Heavy with things neither of them had said yet. They sat until the stars came out, and for the first time in years, Eva didn't feel alone on her porch. She didn't trust him. But trust wasn't needed, only the truth. And the truth was, danger had arrived and she was tired of hiding behind fences. The whispers turned to shouts by the end of the week. Someone had posted a crude drawing on the church door, a woman with a scar and one leg twisted, hand stretched out to a man with no face. "Witch's widow," it read in red ink. "Death follows her." Eva didn't need to ask who it was meant for. The sheriff tore it down before morning prayers, but it was too late. The damage had already spread. Mothers crossed the street with their children. Shopkeepers stiffened when she walked in. One even told her she wasn't welcome. "You bring too much trouble," he muttered. Eva stared at him, unblinking. "Trouble was here before I came." Still, the door shut hard behind her. She tried to stay away from town after that, but Dusty had gone lame. Something in the back, leg, and the only one with the right ointment was Old May behind the livery. As Eva limped through town, sack in hand, someone threw a stone. It struck her hard on the back, knocking her forward into the dirt. The scar on her cheek split again. Warm blood trickled down her chin. Laughter. A boy's voice. "She'll curse. You, look at her. She's already cursed herself." She turned, lips trembling, fists white. The crowd stared. Some smiled. None helped. Then Sheriff Tolliver stepped from the saloon. "That's enough." But his eyes weren't angry. They were afraid. He didn't offer a hand, just stood watching until she pulled herself up and limped away, sack forgotten in the dust. She made it as far as the edge of town before the weight in her chest cracked open. There, beyond the fence line, in the cover of the trees, she collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a cry, just sank to her knees, snow melting beneath her fingers. She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The scar throbbed. Her whole body hurt. But worse than that, she'd believed for one stupid second that things might change, that the man on her porch, the locket, the silence, the looks, it meant something. That maybe her grief had somewhere to go. But Dry Creek had answered, loud and clear. The snow began to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. Cold crept into her bones. Still, she didn't move. Let it take her. Let the world forget her name. Until she heard the boots, slow, careful, crunching across snow and frost-bitten grass. She didn't look up. Didn't need to. He crouched beside her, silent. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then he unwrapped a scarf from his neck and held it out to her. Not forcefully. Just there. Waiting. Her voice cracked when she finally asked, "Why are you here?" "Because no one else is," he said. She almost laughed. "You gonna carry me home now, cowboy?" "No," he said softly. "But I'll walk beside you if you try to get up." And he did. She rose slow, face burning with shame and cold. He offered his arm, and for once, she took it. The walk back wasn't fast. The pain in her leg flared with each step. But he never rushed, never spoke, just matched her pace, matched her breath. When they reached her porch, she expected him to leave. Instead, he followed her up the steps and sat in the chair again. "You gonna tell me who they are?" she asked. The wind blew low. His eyes narrowed. "The riders?" She nodded. "They're not after me," he said. "They're after the man I used to be." She didn't press. After a long pause, he said, "I wore a badge once, watched men hang, thought I was the good kind. Then I made a deal to protect someone I loved. And she died anyway." Eva studied him. "Is that why you came here?" "No," he said. "I came here because a man I hunted long ago died with your husband's locket in his fist." Her heart stopped. "You said it wasn't yours." "It wasn't. But it was meant for someone." He looked at her. "I think your husband died for the wrong man's sins." The silence after that was heavy and full of heat. Eva's hands shook, not with fear, but with something else. For the first time, her grief had a thread to pull. And the man sitting across from her, he wasn't just another shadow. He was the first person in years who hadn't looked away. Later that night, she handed him a cup of tea. Not strong, not sweet, but warm. He sipped it without complaint. She sat across from him, rubbing her leg. "You're not here to save me," she said. "No," he replied. "I don't think you need saving." She smiled faintly. "Most men try. Then most men are fools." For the first time in a long while, Eva slept. Not deeply, not peacefully. But she didn't wake up screaming, and when she did stir before dawn, there was a blanket draped over her. The fire still going. She looked out the window. He was still on the porch, watching the road, waiting for what came next. It began with the fence, just 2 posts and a length of wire, crooked and rough, but it stood upright. "Doesn't look like much," he said, hammering the last nail. Eva brushed a curl from her face, sweat on her brow. "Neither did this town once," he chuckled. "Still don't." She allowed herself a small smile. The first honest one in years. They worked through spring, through aching backs and calloused hands. Each post, each rail, each patch of repaired roof became a kind of quiet, defiance, a message to the town, to the past, to the ghosts still wandering her fields. We're still here, and for a while, it felt like enough. The barn came next, half collapsed since the fire that took her husband. She hadn't touched it in years. Couldn't. But one morning she found the stranger, Caleb, he'd finally told her, standing in its shadow, sleeves rolled, a crowbar in hand. "You don't have to help," she said. "I know," he answered, and pried off the first scorched plank. They rebuilt it together. Side by side, and when the structure stood again, strong, red, smelling of cedar, he looked at her with something that wasn't pity, or respect, or sorrow. It was promise. Nights became firelit. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about the daughter he'd once had, about the woman he couldn't save. Eva listened with still hands and open eyes. She didn't cry. But when the stars came out, she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. She told him things she hadn't said aloud in years. About her limp, how it wasn't from the fire but from being thrown off a horse as a girl. About the scar, how her husband had once said it made her look wild, like something unbreakable. About the day they found her husband's body in the ravine, throat slit, locket gone. How no one had cared. How justice never came. "We make a hell of a pair," he said one night. She nodded. Two ghosts trying to build a life. "Think we can?" She looked around us at the fence, the barn, the freshly planted corral, at Dusty grazing again, at the chair he'd repaired on her porch. "I think we already are." Then the letter came, folded, torn, shoved under her door. One word scrawled across the front in shaky ink. "Run." No signature. No explanation. But the meaning was clear. Someone knew. Someone had remembered who Caleb used to be. And worse, they were coming for him. She found him by the creek, fixing the saddle strap, held out the paper without a word. He read it once, then again, folded it carefully. "They found me," he said. "No," she replied, "they found us." He looked at her long. "You don't have to stay. You didn't ask for any of this." She stepped forward, eyes hot with fire. "You think I'm afraid of men who kill in the dark? I've already buried one love. I won't bury another." His breath caught. He hadn't realized, neither had she, until she said it. That night, they rode to town together. No hiding, no silence. She walked into the saloon and laid her hunting rifle on the table like it belonged there. Caleb followed. Slow, calm. Sheriff Tolliver stood up, hand brushing his pistol. Eva stared him down. "We're not here to cause trouble, but if trouble's coming, we won't be alone when it does." Caleb added, "You still think law matters in this place? Then prove it." Tolliver looked at them both, two broken things reforged, and didn't speak. Just nodded. The next few days were a storm of preparation. Eva sharpened every blade. Caleb cleaned both rifles, teaching her things she never knew. They set lanterns around the barn, lined the fence with broken glass. The townsfolk watched from behind windows. No one helped, but no one stood in the way either. Sometimes that was all you got. On the fourth night, as clouds gathered like bruises above the hills, Eva and Caleb stood outside, watching the wind twist through the dry grass. She turned to him. "If we survive this, I want to turn the barn into a real stable, raise Mustangs." He looked at her like she'd given him air. "Then I'll build you a gate that never closes." She took his hand. Rough, solid, warm. "We can't outrun our pasts," she said. "No," he agreed. "But we can outlive them." The storm hadn't come yet, but the thunder in their hearts told them it would, and when it did, they'd be ready. Together. The last rider fell at dawn. Eva stood in the frost-bitten field, breath ragged, rifle trembling in her hands. Caleb knelt nearby, blood on his sleeve, not his own. Smoke drifted from the barn's roof, but the walls had held. The nightmare was over, or so it seemed. The town came walking out slowly, one by one, as if unsure whether to mourn or marvel. Sheriff Tolliver stepped forward, his eyes catching Caleb's. "You were right, they weren't after us. They were after you." Caleb nodded, steady. "They're dead now." "And what about you?" the sheriff asked. "What do we do with a man whose past brings bullets?" Eva took one step forward, her limp stiff, proud. "You don't do anything," She turned to face the crowd. He's not the curse. I was never the curse. You all just needed someone to blame. Gasps, murmurs. A few people lowered their heads. A few turned away. But one woman, May, from the livery, nodded slow and said nothing. Later, as the smoke cleared and the bodies were buried without names, Caleb sat beside her on the porch, holding a cracked mug of coffee. She looked at him. You could go. You'd be safer somewhere new. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, turned to the small crowd gathering on the road, the sheriff, the blacksmith, May, a few others, the same people who once crossed the street to avoid her. I ain't hiding anymore, Caleb said. If anyone's got something to say it now. Otherwise, this is my home and she's my home too. He reached out and took Eva's hand in front of them all. The silence that followed was a different kind than before. Not cold, not cruel, just quiet. They planted the first fence post together again that summer. A real one for the Mustangs she'd dreamed of. Caleb carved her initials into it with the tip of his knife. They didn't marry with fanfare. No preacher, no papers. Just stars and firelight and a whispered promise beneath the open sky. She wore a white scarf around her. He wore his old marshal badge tucked into his coat pocket. Not as a threat, but a memory. They held hands until dawn. A year later, they had a daughter. Eva named her Lark because she was born singing, even before her first breath. And when the girl got older, she'd ride Dusty bareback through the fields and ask her mama why people used to be scared of her. Eva would smile. Because they'd never seen someone like me before. And what are you? I'm a survivor, baby. She'd kiss her daughter's forehead. And you are the proof. They never tore down the burned barn beam. Let it stand like a scar. Ugly, strong, honest. And on the coldest mornings when frost painted the fields silver and everything went still, Eva would hold Caleb's hand on the porch, their boots side by side. They wouldn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. They'd already chosen each other. Chosen to stay, to build, to love. She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe. And let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.